Melchizedek appears. Long ago, in ancient times, when the world was still full of wonder and stories were carried softly from one generation to the next, a quiet moment unfolded by the wayside. It was a moment gentle and simple, yet wrapped in deep meaning, like a whispered secret held close. There was a man named Abram who was on a long journey. He had traveled far, crossing through lands and valleys, quietly walking under the wide open sky. He carried with him memories and hopes, and a heavy heart touched by the weight of recent events. Abram had just come from a difficult and troubling time. Battles and conflicts had stirred around him, and he had faced a great test. He had rescued his nephew Lot, who had been taken away during a raid. Abram was strong and brave, but now there was a quiet space after the struggle, a moment to breathe slowly and gently. As the dust settled and the sun dipped low, Abram's path met another's. Out of the calm of the land came a figure, steady and peaceful. This man was Melchizedek. His name means King of Righteousness, and he was both a king and a priest, a rare combination. He ruled the city of Salem, a place whose name means peace. It was a spot where calm and holiness met quietly. Melchizedek came to Abram with kindness in his eyes. No words were hurried, no voices raised. His presence was like a soft breeze on a warm evening, bringing comfort after a long day. He carried bread and wine with him. These were simple gifts, yet they carried deep significance, like a quiet offering of rest and renewal. With gentle hands, Melchizedek blessed Abram in the name of the Most High God, the Creator who made heaven and earth. The blessing was slow and soothing, spoken with care and respect. It was a blessing not just for victory, but for peace and goodness to come. Abram responded with gratitude, giving Melchizedek a tenth of everything he had taken in battle. It was a gesture of thanks and acknowledgement, a moment where earthly fights gave way to a sacred exchange beyond simple words. This meeting was brief but meaningful, like the pause between two waves by the shore, a space filled with quiet blessing and respect. Melchizedek then disappeared gently from the story, like a soft note fading into the background. Who was Melchizedek exactly? The Bible doesn't say everything, and some things remain a mystery. We only know this about him. He was both a king and a priest, and he blessed Abram in a way that was unusual and special for that time. The rest is quiet, open to wonder. This encounter, though short, holds a calm weight. It reminds us that even in times of challenge, moments of peace and kindness can appear softly and unexpectedly. The story pauses here, in the soft twilight, with Abram and Melchizedek sharing a gentle moment under the vast, whispering sky, and the night begins to fold around them, carrying the day's memories into the quiet rest that follows. We stay with this peaceful pause, where history and mystery meet in calm, slow waves. The story will continue, but now it is time to rest with this gentle scene and let its quiet blessings settle softly. Abram sat quietly beneath the vast sky, the soft twilight enfolding him like a gentle cloak. The fields stretched beyond, resting under the dusky light, as if the earth itself were exhaling after the storm of battle. Around him, the stillness seemed to hold a sacred peace, a moment outside of time. He gazed down at the bread and wine Melchizedek had placed before him, simple gifts, yet heavy with meaning. The bread, warm and nourishing, reminded him of the daily labor that sustained life. The wine, deep and rich, spoke of celebration and hope. Together they were more than sustenance. They carried a promise. The solemn blessing Melchizedek had spoken echoed softly in Abram's mind. It was a blessing that named the Most High God, the Creator of the heavens and the earth. Abram felt a quiet stirring within, as if the words had opened a window to something tender and vast. These were not just words of power, they were words of invitation. As the echoes of the blessing faded, Abram touched the gifts with reverence. He reached into the pack beside him and found a small pouch, the portion he had set aside, a tenth from the spoils taken in the rescue. Offering it to Melchizedek felt natural, a gesture of gratitude and acknowledgement. Melchizedek accepted it without a word, his eyes calm and steady, as if he understood something beyond the surface of things. Then, as gently as he had arrived, Melchizedek rose. The shadows deepened, folding him into their embrace, and before Abram could speak again, he was gone. The quiet that remained was not empty but full of possibility and promise. Abram stayed for a long while after, his thoughts drifting yet centered. The encounter had been brief, but it was a turning point, a quiet anchor amid the tides of uncertainty that had swept him these last days. In the days that followed, Abram's heart felt lighter. The memories of battle and loss were still there, but they shared space with this new seed of peace, planted firmly by Melchizedek's blessing, watered by that sacred bread and wine. He moved again through the land, but now there was a rhythm to his steps. In his mind's eye, he could still see the peaceful face of Melchizedek, remindful of a kingdom where justice and mercy walked hand in hand. The story of their meeting began to take root in the hearts of those who heard it. A story whispered by campfires and told in the quiet moments between journeys. It was a story of hope, a promise that even amidst trouble, there was a way to find peace and blessing. As Abram looked toward the horizon, the sky brightening with the first hints of dawn, he felt a deep gratitude. The road ahead was long, but he was no longer alone. There were blessings unseen, companions invisible, and a God who kept watch over all things, heaven and earth alike. The encounter with Melchizedek lived on, not as a distant memory, but as a living breath of grace. It was a reminder that in the heart of the world's turmoil, peace is possible. It is present in the bread shared, the wine offered, and the blessings spoken in the name of the Most High. And so Abram rose, ready to journey on, carrying with him the quiet strength of that sacred meeting, a strength that would sustain him through all the days to come. As the first light of dawn softened the horizon, Abram stood quietly beneath the fading stars. The night's encounter with Melchizedek lingered in his mind like a gentle flame, steady and warm against the cool morning air. His heart still carried the weight and the wonder of that moment. The bread and wine, simple yet profound, echoed in his thoughts. They were more than sustenance, they were a promise, a sacred sign of blessing and covenant. He traced the path where Melchizedek had stood, his steps slow and reverent. The ground seemed to hold the memory of that visit, an invisible imprint that Abram could feel beneath his feet. He breathed deeply, tasting the quiet that followed the divine presence. It was not silence but a hush, soft, expectant, as if the earth itself was holding its breath in anticipation of what was still to come. In the days that followed, Abram found his spirit lightened. The burden of past struggles remained, but it no longer weighed him down. Instead, it became a foundation on which he could stand with renewed confidence. He began to see the world with clearer eyes, noticing the small gifts scattered throughout each day, the song of birds at dawn, the tender sprouting of new leaves, the gentle flow of a nearby stream. The blessing Melchizedek had spoken echoed within him, a refrain of grace and protection. Blessed be Abram by the Most High God, creator of heaven and earth. Those words wove through his prayers, weaving a tapestry of hope and assurance that sustained him through moments of uncertainty. His people noticed this change as well. There was a calm strength in Abram's presence that inspired those around him. Their eyes would often turn to him in quiet admiration and growing trust. Some would speak softly among themselves, wondering at the source of this new peace. Abram did not speak of the encounter openly, for some things are held sacred in the heart and need no words to be understood. The memory of the tithe remained vivid too. It was a humble offering, yet it spoke of Abram's acknowledgement of something greater than victory in battle. It was a gesture of gratitude to the Most High, an alignment of Abram's will with a higher purpose. He understood now that his strength did not come from his own hands alone, but was bestowed and sustained by the unseen presence that Melchizedek represented. In quiet moments, Abram would reflect on the paths that had brought him here, the deserts traversed, the battles fought, the alliances made and broken. Each step was part of a larger journey, one that stretched beyond his own understanding, yet pulled him forward with gentle insistence. At times, under the vast canopy of the night sky, Abram would feel again the subtle touch of that blessing, like a soft breeze brushing his cheek. It was as if Melchizedek's departure had left behind a sacred residue, a holy silence filled with promise. Abram learned to listen to that silence, for in it lay wisdom and comfort. One evening, as twilight embraced the camp, Abram sat alone by the fire's edge. The flickering flames mirrored the light in his eyes, a light of quiet resolve. His thoughts drifted to the future, to the generations yet to come. He felt a deep stirring within, a voice calling him to be not just a warrior nor a wanderer, but a beacon of faith for his people. He lifted his gaze to the stars, each one a faint glimmer of the divine vastness. It was here between earth and sky that Abram sensed the fullness of life, both the seen and the unseen. The blessing of Melchizedek had awakened in him a new vision, one that reached beyond the immediate and the tangible. In this vision, Abram saw a lineage not bound by blood alone but by faith and covenant. He saw families growing, communities forming, paths crossing and intertwining. He saw a living legacy of trust in the Most High, a legacy that would endure through trials and triumphs alike. This understanding settled deep within his soul, a gentle anchor amid the shifting tides of life. Abram knew that he did not walk this path alone. The invisible presence that had accompanied Melchizedek stayed with him still, a silent guide, a wellspring of grace. As the days turned into weeks, Abram's encounter slowly became a foundation for the teachings he shared with others. Around the evening fire, he spoke of hope that transcended hardship, of faith that could withstand the darkest night. His words were simple but carried the weight of lived experience, a quiet strength that touched the hearts of his listeners. The camp began to carry a new spirit, one born of peace and rooted in the sacred promise Abram bore. Children played without fear, elders found rest in their stories, and warriors laid down arms in moments of reflection. It was a community transformed, healing at the heart through the blessing given in twilight's calm embrace. Abram's gifts to Melchizedek, the tithes from his victories, grew into a symbol not just of thanksgiving, but of ongoing dedication. He taught that all victories were gifts, and all gifts deserved honor and humility in return. This cycle of giving and receiving became part of their daily rhythm, a sacred dance that lifted their souls and connected them to the divine order. In the quiet moments before sleep, Abram would replay the meeting in his mind, the peaceful demeanor of Melchizedek, the symbolic nourishment of bread and wine, the solemn blessing that spoke of Creator and creation. Each recollection brought a sense of awe and gratitude, a reminder that the divine often comes gently, without fanfare but with profound purpose. He understood now that the journey before him was not merely his own, but part of a great unfolding story. The blessing was a seed planted deep within his heart, destined to grow and bear fruit beyond his lifetime. Abram's faith deepened like a river carving its course through the land. The quiet strength imparted by Melchizedek's visit steadied him in times of doubt. Even when faced with new challenges, Abram could anchor himself to that sacred moment beneath the twilight sky. In the stillness of night, Abram sometimes caught sight of a fleeting shadow on the horizon, a gentle reminder of Melchizedek's presence. It was never intrusive, never demanding, but always reassuring, like a softly whispered prayer carried on the evening breeze. And so the blessing continued to ripple outward, touching all who came to Abram seeking counsel or refuge. His life became a testament to the enduring power of grace, the promise that even in the midst of turmoil, there was a divine calm waiting to be found. Through these years, Abram walked forward, not with haste or arrogance, but with a tranquil confidence. His spirit, once heavy with the trials of battle, now moved with the assurance of one who has been touched by heaven itself. The story of Melchizedek's appearance became woven into the fabric of memory and hope. It was a sacred thread that connected past and future, earth and sky, man and God. And Abram carried it with a humble heart, ready to face whatever destiny awaited, emboldened by the blessing he had received and the enduring presence that had come quietly into his life beneath the twilight glow. As the days waned into years, the peace of that meeting remained a wellspring within him, a gentle song that sustained his soul through all seasons. The bread and wine had nourished not just his body, but his spirit. The blessing had opened a gateway to a life lived in grace and purpose. In this sacred space, Abram's journey found its true meaning, not in the battles he won, but in the peace he embraced, the faith he nurtured, and the hope he offered to all who would listen. The blessing of Melchizedek had become a quiet guide, a steady light in the unfolding story of Abram's life, carrying him onward with strength and serenity beneath the eternal sky. As days unfolded into weeks, Abram found himself more deeply attuned to the quiet rhythms of the blessing Melchizedek had placed within his heart. It was no longer only a memory of an encounter, but a living presence, a gentle undercurrent beneath each choice and step. The bread and wine, tokens given with a solemn grace, lingered in his mind, not as things to hold, but as symbols of a reality that stretched beyond the immediate moment. Each morning, Abram would rise before the sun, finding a cool stillness in the air. He would sit just outside his tent, letting the peacefulness seep into him. Oftentimes, the teachings he shared with his gathered community began here in the solitude, words flowing softly from a place of quiet trust. The camp, once restless with the concerns of survival and disputes over what was scarce, had transformed. Where there had been suspicion, hospitality now grew. Where anxiety had tightened hearts, the breath of hope widened them instead. Men and women, children too, felt that this was a place set apart. A refuge where grace was not a rare offering, but the air they breathed. Abram's act of giving tithes became more than ceremony. It was a rhythm of acknowledging the source of all strength and blessing. Each victory, no matter how small, was accompanied by an offering, not solely of material goods, but of heartfelt thanks. This humbled even the proud, reminding all that no triumph was achieved by human endeavor alone. In the quiet moments between the day's labors, Abram would often find himself gazing into the horizon. He saw more clearly now that his journey was part of something vast, a grand unfolding that he was only beginning to glimpse. The blessing was a seed, fragile yet potent, destined to grow into a sheltering tree under which many might find peace. New challenges came as they always do, but Abram met them with a calm forged in the crucible of faith. The fiery pressures of doubt and fear no longer consumed him. Instead, they refined him. When others faltered, Abram's steady presence became a balm. His counsel, rooted in the grace he had received, provided refuge and clarity. Though Melchizedek had departed long ago, his presence was often subtly felt, like a soft breeze stirring the stillness, or the faint scent of spice lingering after a feast. Signs appeared in quiet moments, a gentle pressure on Abram's heart, a whispered intuition, a glimpse of light unfolding just beyond sight. These were not loud proclamations, but tender reminders that he was not alone. Abram's life became a living testimony to the grace imparted to him. People came seeking his wisdom, drawn by the peace that seemed to radiate from his countenance. He welcomed them with open hands and a listening heart, knowing that each was carrying their own burdens and hopes. In him they found not only guidance, but a mirror reflecting the possibility of peace. The story of the blessing was shared in fireside gatherings, woven into songs and stories passed from one generation to the next. It became a thread binding the community together, a source of enduring strength and understanding. The simple yet profound truths Abram spoke of planted seeds in many hearts, kindling a faith that would outlast the years. Ultimately, Abram came to understand that true meaning was found not in conquest or accolades, but in peace, peace that grounded the soul, faith that sustained it, and hope that lifted it beyond present struggles. The blessing given by Melchizedek was no longer a moment in time, but a living wellspring from which all could drink. As twilight softened the desert sky, Abram would sometimes pause in silence, feeling the deep fulfillment of a life touched by divine grace. The journey was far from over, but the steps taken now were sure, guided by a light that neither shadow nor sorrow could extinguish. In this sacred unfolding, Abram's story gently settled into a quiet truth, that the greatest strength lies in surrender, the greatest wisdom in humility, and the deepest victory in the enduring peace born of faith, embracing each new dawn with a quiet joy, a joy nurtured by the blessing that first appeared like a whisper, but grew into a song echoing through time. Melchizedek's presence was no longer a distant echo. Abram felt it woven into the very fabric of his days, as if the mysterious priest-king moved beside him like a quiet shadow at dawn. Each step Abram took, every breath he drew, was traced by that unseen assurance. He was part of a greater plan that stretched beyond horizons, beyond even time. The camp hummed softly with new energy. What had once been a refuge worn thin by worry and suspicion had blossomed into a sanctuary of warmth and invitation. Faces once guarded now shone with hope. The sound of laughter mixed with the rustling of tents, the murmur of prayer, and the clink of simple offerings brought to the fire. Abram stood at the center of it all, not as a conqueror or a ruler, but as a shepherd tending to the tender growth sprouting in the desert. His voice, calm and steady, carried stories. Stories of faith, of trials met with quiet courage, of blessings that build bridges rather than walls. Those gathered listened not because they sought commands, but because they needed the balm of truth and comfort. In moments stolen alone beneath the sky's vast embrace, Abram revisited Melchizedek's teaching, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth," the priest had spoken, and within those words lay an invitation to draw strength not from power over others, but from reverent gratitude and the acknowledgement of divine source. Abram's offerings took on new meaning, no longer mere ritual or obligation. Each tithe was a sacred dance, a whispered thank you rising like incense. The grain and wine he shared with Melchizedek's memory felt infused with a purity that settled deep in the heart, lifting burdens and quieting discord. Peace settled slowly but surely over the community, like soft light seeping through the cracks of a worn shelter. Arguments that once surged with raw fear softened into conversations seeking understanding. Old rivalries silently dissolved, replaced by hands extended in kindness and respect. The transformation was not marquee deep or the stuff of loud proclamations. It was the gentle turning of the soil beneath weary feet. Wherever Abram walked, hope followed, not flashing or bright, but steady and enduring like the stars above. There were still challenges, quiet tests lurking in the edges of daily life. Harsh nights brought sharp winds and cold that could sap the spirit. Scarce water sometimes nipped at their resilience. But Abram met each trial with a heart trained to listen, to wait, and to trust. Where others saw hardship, he found lessons wrapped in patience. His own spirit was being honed like steel tempered in fire, but it did not harden into something brittle. Instead, it grew supple and alive, able to bend without breaking. Faith was not a blind leap, but a steady hand gripping the unseen, guiding in the dark. Others began to sense this strength. Wanderers came, drawn not by the promise of spoils or riches, but by the subtle peace that clung to Abram's presence. They sought advice, a word of comfort, a trace of that serenity. Abram welcomed each with the same quiet grace Melchizedek had shown him, without judgment, only acceptance in the light of healing. His camp became a refuge not only for body, but for soul. Night after night, stories were shared around the fire. Flames flickered against faces, casting dancing shadows that mingled past and present. The tale of Melchizedek's blessing was told and retold, growing from a passing moment into a sacred thread woven through their collective memory. Children listened wide-eyed as elders spoke gently of divine favor, of how true power was born in surrender and trust, rather than conquest or fame. The story became a seed planted in young hearts, one that would blossom for generations. Abram came to understand that the journey was far less about expanding territory or amassing honor than it was about nurturing a world where peace could take root. His victories were victories over fear, over pride, over the impulse to dominate. Where once he might have welcomed accolades, now he found deeper joy in simple blessings shared and received. The measure of his life was no longer the sway he commanded, but the quiet strength he embodied. Each sunrise brought a fresh song of hope. Each sunset drifted slowly into gratitude. And always, in the sacred silence between, the presence of Melchizedek lingered, a gentle reminder that Abram traveled not alone, but accompanied by a far-reaching spirit that blessed and sustained. In that truth, Abram found the secret to enduring peace, the strength born not from human might, but from humble hearts open to the divine. As the days stretched onward, the camp flourished not in size or wealth, but in the richness of faith and fellowship. The blessing that began as a fleeting touch had grown into a melody, a timeless hymn echoing with grace. Abram moved forward step by unhurried step, sustained by that quiet song that whispered hope into every dawn. As days folded into weeks, the presence of Melchizedek lingered in Abram's thoughts like a gentle ember, steady and warm. It was not just the blessing itself that held power, but the way it shifted something within him, a subtle awakening to a broader horizon. The world around Abram had not transformed overnight. Disputes still flickered here and there, and hardship showed its resolute face. Yet beneath the surface, a seed had been planted, one that pushed toward peace and healing in unexpected ways. Morning light filtered softly through the tense linen walls as Abram knelt in quiet reflection. The usual textures of sand and leather, the simple sounds of life stirring, these grounded him deeply. He no longer felt the restless urge to prove himself by the clarity of his sword or the size of his herds. Instead, his hopes were poured out like water in the desert, steady, patient, life-giving. In these moments, Abram spoke not just of faith, but of gratitude. His prayers were not demands or bargaining, but gentle acknowledgments of all that was given and all that could be shared. He thanked the divine not for wealth or victory, but for the simple breath of existence and the calming presence that soothed his spirit. The quiet transformation rippled beyond Abram's own heart. Those who came to his camp, wanderers, travelers, and settled folk alike, found themselves touched by a new kind of welcome. It was as if Abram carried a mantle woven from the very blessing Melchizedek had given him, one that offered refuge without condition, acceptance without reservation. Neighbors who once eyed his growing strength with suspicion began to approach with softened voices and lighter steps. The old rivalries that once defined the hills and valleys were not erased, but they lost their sharp edges, dulled by time and the persistent influence of Abram's humble example. Arguments once settled by harsh words or threatening glances now ended with nods or gentle handshakes. The peace was not loud or boastful, but real, quiet as dawn. Abram's camp became a sanctuary of sorts, not simply a place to rest, but a sanctuary for the soul. Stories circulated around the evening fires about a king priest who appeared bearing bread and wine, a figure whose blessing had transformed a warrior into a shepherd of peace. These tales were told softly, with reverence, as if to honor both the past and the promise it held for the future. Children listened wide-eyed, their hands wrapped around loaves made from the grain Abram's people sowed. Elders nodded in knowing silence, their dreams now shared in common hope rather than solitary ambition. Melchizedek's blessing was no longer a distant memory, but a living tradition woven into the breath and rhythm of daily life. Abram himself moved through his days with a quiet strength, born not of power but of purpose. His victories were no longer measured in conquered lands or captured spoils. They were victories over fear of loss, of failure, and of the unknown. In this new measure, Abram found more abundant wealth than any material treasure. The spirit that Melchizedek had touched was patient, resilient, and open. It bent with the winds of change rather than breaking. It welcomed the unexpected stranger with kindness. It offered healing where wounds had originally been inflicted. This was the true frontier Abram now sought to explore. The seasons turned as they always do, bringing their own lessons in patience and renewal. With each return of the rains, the land bloomed anew, and Abram's community blossomed alongside it. The people cultivated not just crops but trust, tending to one another with care and respect. Their gatherings grew larger, suffused with prayers and songs that spoke of unity and grace. Even in moments of trial, the harsh sun, the scarcity of water, the uneasy tensions that still occasionally flickered, Abram's faith did not waver. His heart was an ever-flowing well of hope, replenished by the blessing he had received and passed along. This hope was quiet, steady, and unshakable. Out of this calm emerged a sacred rhythm. Each day began with offerings not of obligation but of love, a loaf broken, a cup raised. Each night closed with thanks whispered under starlit skies. Abram's camp was no longer simply a refuge from the world, but a place where peace was made tangible, where sacred trust was woven into the fabric of communal life. As the community thrived, Abram's gaze extended beyond his immediate surroundings. The truths he had come to cherish called him to a broader vision, a world where peace and grace might one day span the lands beyond his little campfire. He spoke less of conquest and more of covenant, less of taking and more of giving. In this evolved path, Abram discovered a profound joy. It was a joy free from the burdens of pride and ambition, a joy born instead from the simple, profound act of sharing blessings. This joy quieted his soul, filling him with a peace that radiated outward, touching all who came near. Melchizedek's blessing had stirred a transformation not just in Abram, but in the journey of a people and indeed in the weaving of their shared destiny. It was a reminder that strength is found not in domination over others, but in the courage to let go, to trust, and to nurture life's delicate beauty. As twilight folded gently around the camp, Abram sat with those gathered near his side. Together they drank from the vessel of peace, breaking bread and sharing stories in low, reverent tones. The remembrance of Melchizedek's blessing was both end and beginning, a sacred thread that tied past and future in a seamless circle of hope. Here, in the quiet rustle of night, Abram understood the true meaning of victory. It was not in conquest, nor in might, but in the enduring promise of peace, made real by faithful hearts. It was a triumph that reached beyond the edges of the horizon, carried softly by the winds that whisper through the tents and trees. And so it was that the blessing lived on, alive in every grateful heart, every healing touch, every courageous act of kindness. The story continued quietly, gently, ever onward. Time passed like a soft breeze through the olive trees, steady and gentle. The seasons marked the rhythms of life, yet within Abram's heart a new quietness had settled. No longer did the sounds of clashing swords echo in the valleys. Instead, there were songs, whispered prayers, and laughter, the crackling of hearth fires gathered under a moonlit sky. Melchizedek's blessing was an enduring ember, growing softly, never demanding attention but quietly shaping every breath, every step. Abram moved through his days with a calm confidence, not born of conquest, but born of understanding. The power to bless, to care, to heal, these were the gifts he now nurtured, tending them as carefully as the fields that yielded life-giving grain. The people around him began to recognize the profound change. The warriors who once stood ready to fight lowered their hands and raised their voices instead, voices weaving stories of hope, courage born not from might, but from steadfast hearts. Children watched in wonder as their elders shared these tales, passing down the memory of Melchizedek's bread and wine, the sacred gifts that transformed a man. Abram's eyes no longer searched the horizon for enemies. He saw the land, the vast embrace of earth and sky, as a temple of shared blessing. Under this expansive view, the hills and streams, the seeds and the shepherds all became part of a covenant wider than himself, wider than his people. His soul expanded gently, reaching toward the unseen threads binding all life together. In this new way, Abram found a vision that welcomed difference and celebrated abundance. Generosity was no longer a strategy, but a natural offering. Wealth was counted not in gold or goods, but in the fullness of relationships and the peace between neighbors. Every act of kindness was a stone laid in the foundation of a community renewed by grace. There were days when hardship knocked at their doors, drought, illness, a loss of loved ones. Yet even in these times, the blessing endured like light beneath clouds. Abram smiled with eyes steady and heart open, knowing pain did not undo the promises born from that sacred meeting with Melchizedek. Instead, suffering invited deeper compassion, stronger bonds, and a quieter strength. Gathering by the fire, the people shared their burdens and their blessings. Stories were told not to boast, but to remind each other of the resilience found in shared hope. Their rituals, once rigid and fearful, transformed into celebrations of life's intricate beauty, a dance of gratitude rising with the morning sun, prayers flowing in rhythm with the seasons, gestures that honored both giver and receiver in the sacred circle of belonging. Abram's role as shepherd unfolded like petals, gentle and strong. He tended not only to the bodies of the people, but to their spirits. His counsel was sought in moments of doubt, his presence a steadying balm. The peace that Melchizedek's blessing instilled spread quietly, a healing current beneath the surface of everyday lives. Night after night, Abram would look up at the stars, remembering the stranger who came bearing bread and wine, blessing him with something far greater than power, a path to peace, a life of purpose rooted in love and covenant. He felt gratitude so deep it filled every corner of his being, and in that gratitude, a profound joy bloomed, soft and enduring. The stories told to children around the fire imagined Melchizedek's hands creating not only bread and wine, but weaving together the threads of community itself. The blessing was not a gift to keep, but a light to lead others toward goodness, kindness, and faithfulness. In this, the people found hope stronger than any sword, a promise that would carry them forward through the years. Time's gentle flow did not halt the world's changes. New faces arrived, bringing fresh challenges and new questions. But Abram's spirit, shaped by Melchizedek's blessing, met these with openness. He listened before speaking, sought understanding before judgment, and welcomed strangers as potential blessings rather than threats. Peace was not a distant dream, but a living breath among them. It did not mean absence of difficulties, but presence of love in the midst of them. The community grew not by force, but by invitation, a call to live generously, to embrace grace, and to walk humbly on the earth. As the seasons turned slowly again, Abram felt a quiet certainty settling in. The legacy of that sacred encounter had become a wellspring, deep and sustaining. His own story, once marked by violence and strife, had been rewritten by blessing and transformed by grace. In the gentle unfolding of days, Abram understood that this blessing, given freely, received humbly, lived faithfully, was the true inheritance worth guarding. No crown or conquest could match the power of a heart made whole through love, peace, and kindness. And so, beneath the wide sky where stars whispered ancient promises, Abram's journey continued, not as a warrior of old, but as a shepherd of peace. Each breath, each moment, a prayer. Each action, a blessing passed quietly from hand to hand, from heart to heart, through the endless dance of life. As seasons cycled quietly through the landscape, Abram found his heart steadily anchored in the steady embrace of peace. The community, once small and unsure, had deepened its roots. Each person carried the blessing of Melchizedek, not as a token of power, but as a living thread weaving them together into a tapestry of shared belonging. The air carried a gentle rhythm now, a pulse of laughter mingled with reflection, of meals shared, and hands joined in silent prayers. The land around them, though still tested by drought and uncertain skies, seemed less harsh, softened by the grace of a people learning how to live as blessing itself. One evening, as twilight folded softly over the encampment, Abram walked among the tents, his steps slow and reverent. The children sat in circles, their faces glowing in the firelight, listening, eyes wide with wonder, to stories of Melchizedek. These tales no longer spoke only of an ancient priest-king, but of an invitation extended to all, to live as vessels of peace, harboring hope in the face of hardship. Abram paused by a group of young ones, their questions gentle echoes of their longing to understand. "Is this blessing something we can hold?" a small voice asked. Abram smiled, the lines of age and experience softening with tenderness. "The blessing cannot be held like a stone or a sword," he whispered, "but it lives in how we treat one another, in kindness shared, in shelter offered, in listening without judgment." His words drifted with the firelight, tender as a breeze, settling into the children's hearts. They imagined themselves as threads in a great cloth, each one indispensable, each one holding the others close. Across the camp, elders gathered in quiet conversation, their faces marked by years, yet glowing with a serene assurance. They spoke not of territory or riches, but of the community's covenant, a promise renewed daily to embrace strangers, to weave peace, to bless even in the midst of pain. Abram listened as one elder spoke of the challenges that came with new arrivals, the uncertainties and friction, but also of the remarkable ways these moments became openings. "Every visitor is a chance to practice grace," said the elder, "to offer peace without conditions, to welcome without fear." The depth of his own past journeys mirrored in the elder's words. He understood now, with a clarity born not of conquest but of surrender, that true strength lay in embracing vulnerability. Strength was the courage to welcome difference, the resilience to endure hardship alongside others, and the humility to learn in every encounter. Night deepened, and silence spread across the camp like a soft blanket. Abram stepped to the edge of the firelight, gazing up at the stars piercing the velvet sky. In that vast expanse, he sensed Melchizedek's blessing, not as a distant memory, but as a living presence, a sacred breath, inspiring all creation to rise toward goodness. His own life, once marked by fear and force, had blossomed into a testament of peace. The old roads of violence had given way to paths of mercy. And with each step, Abram felt the profound pulse of a covenant wider than his own, an inheritance not measured by land, power, but by love made tangible. As dawn approached, a soft breeze whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of rain yet to fall. Abram breathed deeply, the quiet promise of renewal grazing his soul. The community stirred gently, waking to another day poised between challenges and grace, between hardship and hope. In the stillness, Abram knew the blessing would continue to unfold, not as a final destination, but as an ongoing journey. Each moment held potential, each act a way to embody the peace he had come to cherish deeply. He returned to the circle of firelight, where faces brightened with new questions and stories yet to be told. Together, they would walk forward, as keepers of the covenant, shepherds of blessing, living temples where peace dwelt not just in words, but in the sacred ways they met one another. And so, with a heart both gentle and strong, Abram's journey wove onward, an unending prayer shared beneath endless skies, a quiet song of blessing echoing through time. The morning sunlight drifted softly across the camp, spilled like honey through the olive branches, warming the earth, and stirring the delicate scent of wild thyme. Abram moved quietly, each step measured, his eyes tracing the faces of those who called this place home, faces marked by the years of wandering and waiting, but now softened by the glow of new understanding. Children gathered beneath the broad canopy of an ancient fig tree, their voices low with wonder as they retold the stories of Melchizedek, king, priest, stranger, and blessing. Abram sat among them, his weathered hands resting gently on the earth, feeling its warmth seep into his skin. "How do we know," one child asked, "that blessing is more than magic or gold?" Abram's gaze lifted to meet theirs, calm and steady. "Because blessing is not something we hold, it is something we live. It ripples like water, touched by kindness and shared without counting." A girl with wide bright eyes nodded slowly. "So when we give water to the thirsty, even if our well is empty, we still bless?" Abram smiled, the edges of his lips softening. "Yes, when we offer a place at our fire, even if our blankets are thin, we bless, listening without judgment, forgiving without fading. This is the blessing that flows through us." Around them, the camp stirred with a gentle energy, quiet songs rising from simple instruments, the murmur of shared stories, weaving together lives once unseen, now acknowledged. The elders met in the shade of a great sycamore, their voices low, but certain. The covenant they nurtured was fragile yet alive, a delicate thread spun from their collective willingness to embrace strangers as kin, to weave peace through every act. Each visitor, the eldest woman said, brings the chance to practice grace, to hold tension with openness, and to find blessing in unexpected places. A man beside her nodded. "Our path is not made smooth by welcome alone. Friction will come, new customs, fears, unspoken wounds. But it is through these trials that our roots grow deep." Abram listened nearby, the words settling within him like rain upon thirsty soil. His own heart had known fear, of threat, of loss, of unfamiliar faces, but now he understood a deeper strength, born from vulnerability and the courage to share burden and hope alike. Evening enfolded the camp in quiet shadows, stars unlocking their ancient chorus overhead. Abram rose, stepping away from the circle of elders, and found a place among the olive trees where silence and light danced together. There, beneath the vast and patient sky, he felt the presence once more, not as a voice or vision, but as a gentle tide within his spirit. Melchizedek's blessing was not a crown placed upon a head or a token held in hand. It was a living pulse of mercy and peace, flowing through each moment of compassion and each breath of forgiveness. His life, once bound in fear, force, and grasping, had shifted toward something softer, more enduring. A covenant no longer etched into the desire for land or dominance, but carved into the daily acts of love and service. Abram closed his eyes and breathed deeply, the cool night air threading through his thoughts like a balm. The journey ahead was long, strewn with uncertainty and hardship, yet now it shimmered with possibility, an unfolding path of blessings yet to be named or known. As dawn began to brush the horizon with pale gold, Abram felt a gentle renewal bloom in his chest. His role was clear but never complete, to guide, to listen, to embody the covenant as a living temple of peace. He returned to the camp, where the first light caught the hopeful faces of his people, and knew that blessing was not a destination, but a way of being, quiet, consistent, and unseen except by those revealed to the light of grace. And so, under the same sky that had watched generations before, Abram stepped forward, ready to welcome each new day with an open heart and steady hands, carrying the unfolding story of peace gently, faithfully, into the promise of all tomorrows. As the morning light brushed the hills with soft amber hues, Abram moved once more among his people. His footsteps were measured, like a quiet river weaving through stones, and his heart held the steady rhythm of a growing promise. The warmth of the dawn seemed to gather around him, echoing the blessing he had felt, the pulse of mercy and peace nestled deep within his spirit. He found the children again, their faces bright with curiosity, waiting beneath the fig tree. Their questions came gently, like petals floating on a slow breeze. "Will the blessing protect us forever?" one asked, shyly. Abram smiled, watching the way the morning light caught the dew on the leaves nearby. "The blessing," he said softly, "is not a shield that keeps us untouched from the world. It is a fire to warm us when the night feels cold. It is the gentle hand we offer one another when steps grow unsure. It grows in the sharing, small acts of kindness that bloom into trust." The children leaned closer, their attention drawn to the tender certainty in his voice. "Can the blessing help those who are lost?" another whispered. "Indeed," Abram answered. "If your hand reaches out not to bargain or to own, but simply to hold another's, that action alone is a blessing. It teaches us to see beyond the edges of our own fears." He sat quietly for a moment beneath the spreading branches, watching the birds awaken with soft calls. Somewhere not far, the camp stirred to song, a melody weaving among the olive trees and whispering winds. Abram stood, feeling the gentle weight of the morning on his shoulders. His eyes caught the elders gathering under the sycamore once more, their conversations a rhythm, now familiar and steady. He approached them slowly, joining the circle with a nod. "We speak of the covenant," one elder said thoughtfully, "and of the promise to embrace strangers as kin. But what of the old fears still lodged in our hearts? What of the shadows cast by wounds we have not yet spoken?" Abram's gaze softened. "Fear never truly disappears. It whispers at the edges of hope. But it is courage, not absence of fear, that writes our path. The wounds you speak of," he continued, "are the spaces where mercy can spring forth. To acknowledge them is to water the roots of peace." Another elder nodded, a faint smile warming his face. "It is easier to stand apart than to step together." "But we learn," Abram replied, "that standing together requires an openness, to patience, to discomfort, to growth. We are building a home not from stones alone, but from the fragile living threads of grace." The conversation settled into a quiet understanding. Abram's thoughts returned to the covenant, how it was not only a promise written in words, but a living practice woven through daily deeds. He remembered the night before, when Melchizedek's blessing had pulsed like a gentle flame beneath his ribs. It was not empty power or grand command, but the soft pulse of mercy. That mercy was a song, a cadence carried in every helping hand, every humble meal shared, every moment held with presence. Abram moved to a shaded corner of the camp, where a small group was tending a fire. Their hands were busy shaping bread, offering simple gifts of sustenance. He watched quietly, the sight stirring a quiet peace within him. "Let us not forget," he said softly to them, "that to serve another, especially when we have little, is to honor Melchizedek's blessing. It is in giving what we can, no matter its size, that the true wealth of the heart is revealed." Meeting his eyes with a nod. "Sometimes," she admitted, "it feels like there is never enough." Abram smiled gently. "That is when giving becomes an act of faith. It is not the measure of what we have that counts, but the courage to share it anyway." Abram found himself in moments of listening, hearing the hopes whispered beneath breaths, the quiet sorrows carried in steady hands, the laughter that rose like a blessing itself. He walked the outskirts of the camp, where new faces mingled with those seasoned by time, strangers and kin weaving a tapestry of belonging that shimmered with fragile promise. The olive trees stood witness, their branches swaying in rhythm with the wind's sighs, as if to remind all gathered of the ancient roots binding them to the land and to each other. Abram paused beneath an ancient tree, feeling the roughness of bark against his palm. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, sensing the layers of generations cradled in the soil. Here was a place of both remembrance and becoming. He thought of the covenant again, a thread stretching beyond the horizon, delicate but strong. "This," he whispered, "is the path we walk. Not alone, but together, with hands open, hearts aligned, carrying peace as both journey and destination." As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the camp, Abram gathered his people once more. They formed a circle beneath the fading light, a community bound not by might or gold, but by the quiet strength of shared blessing. His voice was calm, steady, a murmur blending with the gentle rustle of leaves. "Let us carry this blessing into the days ahead," he said, "not as a treasure to guard, but as a light to share. In our service, our kindness, our vulnerability, we make this covenant breathe, we keep it alive." The people listened, the warmth of hope glowing softly in their eyes. Around them the first stars blinked awake, silent witnesses to a promise renewed beneath the vast, tender sky. Abram stood quietly, feeling the pulse of mercy still steady in his heart. The journey was far from over, but the path was clear. Together they would walk it gently forward, each step a blessing, each day a gift of peace. And so, as night embraced the camp, the story wove soft and steady, like the steady hum of life itself, quiet, enduring, and full of grace.